Hello friends, welcome to Flosstube and Variety Show number 48. I'm Emily Williams in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and greetings from, so that sometimes we call Chapel Hill the southern part of heaven, and other times, on days like today when the high temperature is 99, we call it the northern part of another region. So greetings from very hot Chapel Hill, North Carolina. This is Flosstube, which means you will see some of my cross-stitch projects. And it's a variety show, meaning that you will see some other projects as well. And I mean, not other projects necessarily, but other topics that are things I decide to talk about. So we'll see what today holds in the variety show arena. But first, a little cross-stitch. By the way, I have a little bit different lighting, and I don't know how this is going to work. We'll see. This is Under the Roof of Blue Ionian Weather, charted by Golden Kite. Golden Kite is known for their art reproduction pieces, charts, mostly, I would say, or a lot. And here's where I am. I don't take this out of the hoop usually because the hoop is one of these that requires a screwdriver to tighten and loosen it, and I'm sorry, it's just easier to leave it. So I've been working over here. I've been filling in a lot of the individual stitches and the little bits of color over here. And this is a little low because of where it goes over here. I can't reach it for the hoop, so I'm gonna ignore that for the time being. I'm gonna do this. This is the sleeve of the next woman, and her head is up in here somewhere. And these darker things are pieces of rose bush. Roses, we call it. We call it roses if it's pieces of rose bush. They're on the bench beside her. So I'm hoping to, fill in this little bit that's here, and there are a few little individual stitches over in this side of one stitch or two stitches of a color or a blend that I'm going to do, and then I'm going to move the hoop down probably first so I can pick up this and then over. So the next time you see this, which will probably be in 2 weeks, I will have moved it down, or maybe I'll be in the process of moving it down in order to get some things that are missing from this lower section. Yeah, speaking of a hot day, Ionian weather is hot, I'm pretty sure. So, Under the Roof of Blue Ionian Weather. I am going to show you Flea Market Flowers. I haven't finished it, but it is just possible I will have by my next video. I'm not making any promises, but you never know. I won't show you the pattern very long because really I should show you this. Now, one of the reasons I think I might finish, so what will the date be of our next video? The 24th. Yeah, maybe. So if I finish this flower, and there's then 3 flowers down here, which are just like, they're just like this. These 2 flowers, they're 3. Instead of 2, there are 3 that fit down here. Pretty sure they're just exactly the same size. And if I finish this and I do one of those flowers, I will have done, at that point, 2,000 stitches in the month of June on this, this is my focus piece for semi-sane stitchers in a Facebook group I've mentioned before. And then if I finish the last 2 flowers, that's another 450 or so stitches toward another 1,000. And then at that point, I would shift to a different project for my stitch counting for that group. But I could possibly finish this by a week from now. If not, I will be trying to finish it by the end of the month. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But yeah. We'll see. Also, as you recall, last video I mentioned that my birthday is this week. It was yesterday, actually. I had a very nice day. some great conversations with friends. My son called. I got a shout out on Cracking the Cryptic videos for my birthday, which was really fun, and breakfast with another friend, and some other friends came in the evening, and we had birthday cake, and it was very nice. And I did start sampler 193 by what is it called? 2x2 stitch. And I did it, I started it. I'm not taking this out of the hoop because, I mean, you get an idea how big it is. This fabric is 21.5 inches, I think. The finished size will be 16.5 inches, and this is 16 count white Aida by Zweigart. And you can tell it's Zweigart because it has the orange thread in there, which I got it from 123 Stitch, yes. And I chose to do it in red. Red is my favorite color. It's really hard to tell in this light, but this is DMC 777, which I would call a dark blue red or raspberry direction. It's not a Chinese red, it's raspberry. And I'll pick this up again. So I started in the center, which I don't normally do, but I did it this time because I really wanted to be sure this was centered on this large piece of fabric. And what I'm planning to do is to work my way up to the top and then work from the top down as I usually do these days. So far, it's been very fun. The last time I worked on something that was this type of design, all in one color, was that ornament project I did last year, which was in 2 shades of blue. So it was 2 colors, I guess you might say. And I had forgotten since then how great it is to just, when I have a little bit of thread left, to move along and just to the next little section. And it's easy you just keep going. Now, one of the topics that comes up when I read in Facebook posts, and mostly that, and see it on Flosstube, other Flosstube videos of stitchers that are much more experienced than I, is the question of how much do you carry your threads? So I have some thoughts on that. One of the comforting concepts that I learned from Kitten Stitcher, I've mentioned her before, Teresa Vanette is her name, and she has a Flosstube. I can't remember what you look it up under. Maybe Shakespeare's Peddler is another, her business name is Shakespeare's Peddler, maybe. Kitten Stitcher, I think, is what her Flosstube is under. But she says that when you're framing something that you've carried threads, you can put a piece of gray mat board behind your stitched item, and that makes the carried threads pretty much disappear. So even though they might show through if you backed it with white, which often the foam core board that you might pin to is white, that if you put something gray behind it instead of that stark white, that the carried threads can't be seen. So that's my plan. And if I ended up making a cushion out of this, which is, if I do anything with it at all, which that's also possible, is just to say, oh look, I finished this and put it away. But if I do something with it and I decide to make a cushion, I can put a piece of gray fabric behind this and then finish it from there. So that's a possibility. So that is what I'm going to show you today in cross stitch. I have worked more on the purple sampler, but not very much. And I'm sorry, one of the reasons I only show Under the Roof of Blue Ionian Weather for those who are new subscribers, which thank you very much. It's thrilling to have you join me. But one of the reasons I only show that every other week is because it's a full coverage piece and it's very large and it's very gray. And it's hard for me to prove to you that I even did anything if I only show you 1 week's worth of work. So that's why. Now I will say that piece I'm using as a challenge for Full Coverage Fanatics, which is a Facebook group I'm part of. And the goal for this year is 22,000 stitches, which I am very far behind on making that goal. So if I'm going to do that, I'm going to really have to pick up the pace on that. So perhaps I will, once I finish Flea Market Flowers, I will get a little more fire lit to do that. So that's all I want to talk about with regard to cross stitch today. So what is the variety show portion? And I can tell right now that I'm going to have to pause the video for a minute or two because my husband has just arrived home with the groceries. So I'll catch you in a few minutes. For you, it will be just a few seconds. False alarm. I thought that that's where he was, but I remember now that he went up to take a nap. So much for my being aware of what's going on in the world. Anyway, back to, we were just about to start the variety show. So I want to talk about cookbooks. Now that may seem like something that some of you are just going to say, oh yeah, I don't cook. I'm tuning out of this one. And I get that. A lot of people don't cook these days. However, even though, and I would recommend that you just hold on for just a few minutes because there might be something entertaining in a moment, a few minutes. Even though a lot of people don't cook, apparently cookbook sales are still strong. And in fact, publishers still publish cookbooks in physical book form more than they do other kinds of books. So even though we are a society of fast food and restaurants and carry out and going to the pre-made counters at the supermarkets, we still cook, apparently, or at least we read cookbooks. So I, over the years, have amassed a great quantity of cookbooks because one does. They make good gifts. There's often a topic or an author or a location or something that makes cookbooks of interest. Organizations like churches and the Better Business Bureau, well, I guess that wouldn't be it, but the Kiwanis or something, they put out cookbooks from time to time. And so it still happens. And I have a number of those. But I'm going to show you a book. Now, you can tell this is not a new book. It's called the Eating-In-Bed Cookbook. And it's by Barbara Ninde, Ninde Byfield is her last name. It was published, by MacMillan in 1962. I was 4 years old then, so you can do the math. My birthday, I am a perfect square that is also a power of 2, so you can do some math there. The Eating-In-Bed Cookbook, something I love about it, so it's illustrated by the author. There are many intriguing illustrations, but the binding looks like mattress ticking, which in 1962, mattresses and pillows often looked like this. Now they're, different kinds of materials are used. And for the purposes of my showing you the book, I'm actually going to take this very tattered book cover off. I should probably get one of those library version plastic sleeves to put that in to preserve it to the extent that it can be preserved. But this is the Eating-In-Bed Cookbook. And so a couple of interesting things. One is that my parents gave this to my father's mother for Christmas, probably in 1962, and she kept the little tag, my grandmother did, to remind her of how she got it. And she also wrote a little note here, 51 and 59, I don't know if you can see the little penciled note. And actually, I noticed that really just before I started making the video, so I don't know what's on those pages. Let's just take a look. Oh, cheesecake under the covers. And the thin edge of the wedge, oh yes, which is basically a chocolate mousse. But here's the point of this book, is that these are recipes. This is a cookbook. It's a recipe book. But this author has cast all of this in such a way that you want to read it, or want to eat in bed. And so it's sort of a funny, it's a humorous take on things. And the recipes are real recipes. I'm going to read you a couple of them in a minute. But the titles are whimsical and reminiscent of eating in bed. So I wanted to read a few things, and of course, I'm a little bit disoriented as to where I was going to start. Okay, I'm going to start with the introduction. So here's one of the illustrations. You can think of this as story hour. The introduction by Barbara Byfield. So something odd happened, and I got the video stopped. Fortunately, I noticed it pretty quickly. So I think I can pick up where I left off. You will know by the time you get to this moment in the video whether I was very successful in doing a nice edit on that. And by the way, the light going on and off is just the sunlight outside. So I'm sorry if that's distracting. All right, I was about to start by reading a little bit of the introduction. There is a secret. I'm sorry. I made the same mistake in the previous version of this, so I'll fix it this time in terms of my inflection because I wasn't reading ahead. There is a secret wholesome indulgence to eating in bed, which perhaps explains why it has not received the uniformly good press of other things which go on in bed, and which are certainly no less an indulgence. The trouble is, nobody ever thought of proving one's manhood or femininity by eating, and although it is well nigh impossible to prove them without eating at some point, as a bedtime activity, eating is generally done alone, and thus the word doesn't get around. It is not the intention of this book to set up competition between the two activities. There is time enough to accomplish every bedtime delight, including sleep. The purpose here is to enhance one's time in bed, however spent, by opening up a whole new way of life. And she goes on a bit, and then I'm going to read the acknowledgments. It is difficult to list in the brief moments left before bedtime the many influences on this book, but thanks are certainly due to Palace Laundry, Gotham Dry Cleaners, and Nicola's Market, whose astronomical monthly bills for clean sheets, removing butter spots from my velvet bedspread, and providing superb test materials served as a stern inspiration to get on with the job. So then she goes on, she has a section on postures and procedures, and that's her illustration. You might want to pause the video to examine that more closely. And then she goes into recipes, and they have whimsical names. I can't remember if I said that already, sorry. But I'm just going to read a couple of excerpts from the recipes I found most intriguing. So she has a section on just because you love yourself. And here's the illustration from that. She did the illustrations herself. And this recipe is called Curried Favor. She says, if you give yourself this to eat, you really do love yourself, and no more need be said about it. Although I am giving you this recipe in elephant-sized quantity, you can, with a little ingenuity, increase the amounts to make enough for one serving. It's that good. Marinate overnight 7 pounds of cubed lamb. So you see the quantity she's talking about, and then it has, you marinate it in yogurt, you create this very large quantity of curry ingredients, ground up onions and garlic, and then you have cloves, cinnamon, turmeric, ginger, curry powder, pepper, cardamom, and salt and so forth. And then you serve it with rice. And another one, so as I may have mentioned, again, this is so weird for me to not know for sure what I already said. This cookbook was published in 1962. I was 4 years old at the time. So at some point in my childhood, I encountered this cookbook at my grandmother's house. And this recipe that I'm about to read was the one that was the most intriguing to me. And one thing to note about this is that I was a child, so I don't even think I knew what I was reading about. So she has a section on eating in the bathtub because some kinds of foods are not conducive to eating in bed. They'd be better eaten in the bathtub. Watermelon hollandaise, this is. She writes, particularly suitable for beach picnics if one is needful of company, this recipe adapts perfectly to the exigencies of bathtub dining if you want a solitary debauch. Choose a watermelon at the peak of ripeness. Now bounce it very, very gently on the floor until you can hear sloshing inside, the meat breaking up thoroughly into succulent ice-cold pulp. This can take up to half an hour. Carefully cut a hole in the top of the melon and pour into it a bottle or two of Bull Genever or any good gin. Drink it directly from the melon using 2 straws if you're very thirsty. So I was a young child when I encountered this, and I was fascinated with the idea that you could bounce a watermelon on the ground and the meat inside it would break up into basically liquid. And I remember asking my mother, can we buy a watermelon so I can do this? And she never did let me. And back in those days, the only watermelons you could get were, 24 inches long and great big sort of long blimp-shaped fruits. I don't know how you would actually bounce something that shape on the ground. Now you can get round watermelons that are, in fact, seedless. I maybe should try this. I don't know about 2 bottles of gin, but I'm at least curious about the watermelon part. Now, in the topic of cookbooks, of course, I have a lot of recipes. I didn't get down the recipe box that was my mother's or the recipe folders that I have in the recipe. I don't think I ever had a recipe box. I had a recipe accordion file that was given to me as at a wedding shower, bridal shower, before my husband and I got married. But it became unwieldy to use recipe boxes after a while because I had so many recipes. And so I started to collect them by typing them into my computer, into a Word document. Now the first one I did was actually called Ruby's Kitchen. And this was recipes of a family friend of ours. And this one I did in 1998. And she was the kind of person who, she did some cooking herself. She was quite a good cook herself. But wherever she went, if she encountered something she liked, she would ask for the recipe. And she might say, I don't think I would make this, but I know someone who would. I would like to pass it on. And people let her have the recipes. Well, then in 2001, I think it is, I created my first cookbook called Emily's Kitchen. And this is the first edition, and in it I have an introduction which talks about sort of how I came to do this, how I came to put this together. And then the table of contents that has the different categories: main dishes, side dishes, soup, salad, sauces, and relishes. Indian feast, because my friend Susan and I used to do an Indian feast at least once a year where we would do Indian dishes, invite friends over to eat it with us. Breads, cookies, cakes, desserts, and other sweets. And I wanted to read a paragraph or two from the introduction that I wrote in 2001. So my mother died, actually, I see that it's written here, so never mind. Let me just read. Stick with the program, Emily. My first idea for this cookbook was to feature recipes that my mother had used and enjoyed. Since her death in 1999 and my having in my possession her recipe file, I thought it would be easy to select the top few dozen recipes that would have been recognized as hers. When I went through her recipe file, though, I found that it was not that easy to select recipes that were truly hers. Most of the recipes in her file were in various handwritings, with the names of Leroy friends from DIR, church, community activities, distant friends, or her mother and her mother's friends. Her recipe collection, I discovered, was very extensive and much represented her life. What was more, I discovered several recipes that I had introduced to her among her collection. In fact, the recipes that were the most familiar or memorable to me among moms were in my own recipe file too. We had shared them back and forth over the years, or the same friends who gave them to Mom also gave them to me. If I had selected the top recipes from her file, I would have been selecting what were also favorite ones from my file. And so I decided that I would make my own cookbook, and then I'll read from another paragraph here. Another realization I came to as I assembled these recipes is that there is a difference between recipes and cooking. One can have a vast collection of recipes and yet rarely use them. This was true of my mother, and it is true of me also. The staples of our daily meals were usually too simple and too familiar to write down in the form of a recipe. Meatloaf, for example, or apple pie. There was no need to write down either the ingredients or the method for this sort of dish. In fact, I make these things the way my mother did, not because she ever consciously described how to do it, but because she and I did it together. Cooking is putting ingredients together in ways that are familiar and trustworthy because it is how you always do it. Recipes for the main components of a meal, therefore, were used by my mother for special meals or special occasions. Everyday cooking, however, was an invention of a sort rather than by formula. This is true of my everyday family suppers as well. And I go on. So this is the first edition. Well, then time passed, and I had given away the first edition. In fact, I thought I didn't have a copy. And in fact, I don't have a final copy. I do have a sort of the final prototype before I made it. But in 2008, I created the second edition, Emily's Kitchen, the second edition. And I include the introduction to the first edition in the second edition because it forms the basis of my philosophy of food, really. And then in 2008, I've been thinking for a few years that it was time to bring out a second edition of this cookbook. Many of you have been very kind in your praise of the recipes in the first edition, and I thank you. But since 2001, I've eaten many a delicious meal and discovered some new favorites. So in these pages, you will find many recipes repeated from the first edition because they are still things that I prepare often. You'll also find some new ones discovered in cooking group, or more accurately, eating group, or sometimes called drinking group, or other gatherings. There seem to be no shortage of new things to eat. Eating is a community experience. The word companion, after all, has its roots in breaking bread together. I'm so blessed to have many friends who love good food, so I'm continually exposed to new treats. And so on. All of the recipes in this second edition cookbook are recipes I have made. I have actually eaten, for sure, I've 100% eaten them, and I possibly, in almost all cases, have made them. Second edition. And then in 2015, more Emily's Kitchen. And I assembled these in part as gifts to give to people, and in part because it was sort of self-protection against the piles of pieces of paper, loose sheets of paper of recipes. So here's a little bit of the introduction to more Emily's Kitchen. Since I pulled together the second edition of Emily's Kitchen in 2008, I've done a lot more eating. Of course, that means I've come across several more recipes that have become favorites. This edition contains 27 more recipes that don't appear in the second edition of my cookbook. You will find in this collection an assortment of Moorish snacks and appetizers, main dishes, side dishes, and of course sweets. In this day and age, one is as likely to search the internet as to turn to a favorite cookbook, and this collection includes a couple of recipes that first came from some online source or other. Most of them, though, have some particular customizations, whether substitutions of ingredients or revisions to the method. Some of these recipes are from friends, of course, and a couple are from cookbooks that I own, and I give attributions where I can. So these two books I still have copies of. And if you are interested in having these books, I would be happy to send them to you. To local friends, I would be happy to leave them on my porch and you can swing by and pick them up. But I would think that most of my local friends probably already have copies because that's what I created them for my own convenience, but also to give them away. So if you are not a local friend and you are interested in having these cookbooks, let's say I'm willing to send out 5 sets. So if you are interested, and if you just say so in the comments, and I will randomly pick 5 of you. And if only 6 of you want it, I'll send it to all. If 15 of you want it, I won't. I will just send it to 5. It's mainly the postage and I know that I have mailing envelopes. I'm pretty sure that I can easily pack up 5 of them. So that's sort of my thinking. But if you weren't one of the 5 selected and you desperately want one, feel free to send me a message. So put it in the comments below this video that you're interested, and I'll see what happens. So that is all and more that I wanted to say today. The Eating-In-Bed Cookbook, by the way, out of print, of course, it is available used, I checked. So you could get a copy for yourself if you're interested in that. It's quite entertaining. It'd be great for somebody who has a cookbook collection, actually, as a gift, or for yourself if you have a cookbook collection. A little hard to say. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. To my new subscribers, welcome. To all of you, I appreciate your coming back to join me and listening to me talk about the things that come to mind. I hope you found something interesting today, and I hope you have a great week of stitching or doing other crafts or however you're going to be spending your time. Many blessings, friends.